Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the JPU Show, the podcast show chock full of practical and helpful advice for podcasters of all skill levels, sponsored by the Jax Podcasters United Group, the home for podcasters and audio creators in Northeast Florida. I'm your host, Badr Milligan, and today I'm joined by the lovely and newly married Blythe Brumleaf. Big brain, Blythe Brumleaf.
Well, hello first, but we are both newly married.
There we go, yeah.
I was going to say, you better have your ring on.
What about you? Where's yours? Show it off to the camera.
Too.
There we go. All right, there we go. Hey, we got Blythe. Yeah, it don't roll off the tongue the same way. Big brain Blythe Brumleaf. The alliteration. I think I still want to use that for the podcast. But to everyone else, we got Blythe Milligan. All right, it's Blythe Milligan to you.
You can say Blythe Elizabeth Milligan.
No, we were just.
I didn't even think about that, but I do have to change my intro about how I introduce myself. That's a first. I didn't, because I introduced myself today on a podcast recording, and I called myself Blythe Brumleaf. So that's something I'm gonna have to.
Branding. I mean, look, it's going to be a slow adoption. It don't come overnight. But folks, we got a great topic for you today. Today we're going to be talking about AI transcript. Well, no, not AI transcripts. I apologize. Today we'll be talking about AI generated episode titles and descriptions versus humans. Now, you can already, if you've been listening to any number of episodes of this show, you can already tell just sometimes from the title of our episodes which one of us brought these topics to the table. And safe to say, this one is a big brain Blythe topic. So, Blythe, I toss it to you. What are we talking about today? What's this topic that you've got on our doc?
Sure. So in our previous episodes that we've recorded, AI has been a little bit of, I guess, a controversial topic. We have gotten, some comments on the YouTube channel that folks aren't exactly happy with a lot of AI products. And so I thought that this was a great story to sort of feed that fire a little bit, the I told you so crowd. But there's obviously caveats that we're going to get into. Reading from Pod News. Yeah, Pod News. So they have a daily email newsletter that goes out for folks who may not be aware. You should definitely subscribe to it, because that's where we get a lot of topic ideas for this show based on the conversations that are happening within that newsletter, anything that sort of draws our eye and piques our interest. And so from Pod News, they released this little paragraph talking about the Australian ABC has published its findings from a project where the broadcaster used AI to try to optimize episode titles and descriptions. AI isn't their conclusion, and summarizing here, but AI isn't better than humans, the research discovers, but it can be useful for summarizing and inspiration. Highlighting cultural differences, it also appeared difficult to stop AI from using a US English style of writing. And so it kind of goes on to beg the question that if your episode titles and descriptions, I would argue, are the most important part of your podcast, if you are pushing that off to AI only, you're making a mistake. Based on my own personal experience, based on this, broadcaster's experience, which I would not. It's not even relative to one specific broadcaster, because this is the Australian ABC. So it's several broadcasters on their team trying to work smarter, not harder. And so that with a lot of the promise of AI, I would argue that primarily in podcasting, it's being used for episode titles, descriptions, and transcriptions. But which aspects of that part are actually the most useful? And if you go by what this study and what these opinions of these broadcasters say, they really don't find a lot of value in using it outside of ideation, outside of inspiration. So really kind of being that extra pair of eyes on your own work. So there's a couple quotes that I thought were really interesting. And it says, according to the 2023 ABC audio market study, 28% of podcast listeners decide on what to listen to based on the episode title and description text. It applies to much of the people following a show as much as it does to the people searching for one. The research found that a large section of the audience find and choose podcasts through these titles and descriptions. And so it goes on to say that despite our best efforts optimizing the prompt, so the prompt is what you enter into like a chat GPT and ask it for output. Despite our best efforts optimizing the prompt, there was a tendency to sensationalize. There was a lack of originality, and many of the suggestions were overly simplistic. Some of the words being used by teams to describe the suggested titles and descriptions included generic, corny, sappy, and cringe. All of those emotions I have felt reading episode titles from AI. So first thoughts for you, is this a yes, I was right type of moment, or maybe it's a user case error?
No, I don't feel any one way about AI, not strongly at least. I think you have tried your best to make me an adopter of AI. I'm still trying to figure out where I could use it from. I just, in my limited experience, I just haven't been impressed enough to like fully adopt it into my podcast process. That aside, I did find this really, so it's just a long form article that that we'll link in the show notes as well. But I actually ended up reading through the whole thing, which is a little different from the other surveys and articles and findings and researches that we've talked about on this show. I felt like this one was a little more digestible and a little more interesting. And I guess to take a quick back step, ABC is an Australian news company. So they also produce a lot of different podcasts, all centered on Australian news, politics, culture, society, things like that. So I was impressed by, one, how serious they took this exercise. And I guess they have a pretty large team when it comes to their podcast team, because they were talking about like allowing different teams and editors to adjust certain inputs. Like I guess they all agreed upon one input to type into. I think it was Microsoft Copilot in this instance was the AI tool they used, and so they started with one input, and then every different team and editor were allowed to like slightly adjust it according to what they needed, and so forth. So I did like that they were willing to have like controls and different variations going on. One thing I picked up was just the importance your episode title and description, how much that plays into possibly getting a potential listener to check it out. They have a chart here, but they ask, I guess, a sample size or a group of people, what motivates you to try a new podcast when browsing for on-demand audio content? And it says that 28% of podcast listeners decide what to listen to based on the episode title and description text. It applies as much to people following a show as much as it does to people searching for one. This is my long-winded way of saying that reading this, it kind of just solidifies that you want to use AI as a Kickstarter, as a fire starter to get ideas going. And, some of those mundane things I found were pretty interesting, that they even show like, hey, here's some of the inputs that we got, what a human title, like a good example of what a human would come up with for a title, like one of our editors versus AI, and to see some of those similarities. And then the bad examples, and I guess the bad examples, did you see any common characteristics among like the bad examples they showed of like, hey, here's a title that AI spit out?
Yes, I did browse through them, and it's a lot of the same experience that I've had, to the point where we have now removed AI from that part of our podcast process. It has
Wow.
been a large part of, I have an assistant, Lindsay, who, JPU members might know her now. She's helping us out with a lot of promotion of, this show, this content, promoting and putting these kinds of discussions up to the Facebook group, because as we grow and as this thing grows, we're going to have less time to devote to some of the more administrative tasks. So she's helping out a ton with that, but she also doesn't have a whole lot of time to listen to an entire episode of ours and then come up with a catchy title, come up with catchy episode descriptions and things like that. She doesn't have that kind of time. And so that's where we have been using AI to supplement it, by taking the transcripts of our episodes, uploading it into one of these systems. She really likes using Claude. I kind of go back and forth between Claude and ChatGPT. What's important for folks to understand is that all of these models are different, and they're going to give you different outputs. These people were using Microsoft Copilot, which is a version of ChatGPT, but it's the 3.5 version. We're already close to ChatGPT 5 being released. And each time that they release a new version, it becomes miles better. But with that said, it's still very important, especially if they're working off of it. It was rumored that they are either on ChatGPT 3.5 or ChatGPT 4 while conducting this study. And so to me, it is a big difference in the level of the quality of result that you're going to get. Frankly, it's not very good on 3.5. It's practically useless. There's still a lot of hallucinations on the older versions. And so if you have a paid account with ChatGPT, it's $20 a month. It's the best still, with all of the bad things I've just said about AI, it's still the best $20 I spend a month, because I can have almost like another version of me that I can throw some ideas in and just get feedback back. So with a lot of these tools, they are eventually going to reach a level of parity where Claude, ChatGPT, Copilot, even Facebook's or Meta's Llama, which is open source. A lot of these different tools are going to get to a level of parity where they all are kind of using the same information. What's going to differentiate the output is the data that you provide to it. And so from reading over a lot of the reporter responses in this particular instance, is that they had a lot of trouble with the prompts, getting the results to remove the cringiness, remove the over punctuation. There's a chart out there that shows the amount of times that the word delve has been used in media this year versus all previous years. And it's literally like a rocket ship of growth that, for whatever reason, the AI software, the AI platforms love that word. And so if I see it in some of my work, it's instantly axed. Like I just, that's a level of editing that we have to go through now. But it started, we had a process of Lindsay would load in the transcript. She'd write out a really good prompt. We have a Google Doc with all of our favorite prompts sort of saved and off to the side that we can reference really quickly. And so she'll ask you for 5 different episode titles based on the transcript, and she'll ask you for 5 different descriptions. 9 times out of 10, all of them suck. All of them. And it's gotten to the point where it's easier for me after an episode to write down the title that I think is going to work best, the description that I think is going to work best. And then we use AI now to find pull quotes. It's still not an exact science. One of I think the best quotes that I've heard about AI is, the worst day for AI is on the first day. So if you're not actively using your own information to help power these tools like a Copilot, not necessarily Copilot the program, but acting as a Copilot to you and your work, that's where I see the most advantageous. In even the most recent update from ChatGPT, which is like 4.4.io, they even put a rate limit on it because of the context window that it is pulling from is so vastly improved to 3.5 that they have to kind of limit it a little bit to how often people are using the more powerful version. And so all of this to say is that, with a lot of the gripes that the reporters were feeling, one of the reporter notes, they say the downside and somewhat encouraging learning from this experiment for me has been that AI doesn't seem to be better than humans at headline writing. While it occasionally comes up with a usable, if uninspired headline, it's a long way from what we humans can come up with. So it sort of begs I think it just hammers home the point that as creatives, we are constantly tasked with coming up with new things. And if episode titles and descriptions are the most important thing to promote a podcast, then maybe that's where we need to shift our energy so that we're not offloading this task the second we get done recording. That maybe with all of the extra time that you're saving from not having to hand transcribe an entire podcast file, the time you're saving from there, you should be devoting to the most important areas, and that's your titles and descriptions. If you're stuck, if you don't have a good idea of what, that conversation title or description could be, that's where you plug in a really great episode notes. That was one thing that they also noted too, is that the more focused input increased the quality of output. When producers crafted concise episode notes for the episode, we saw better results. The broader the input, example, podcast transcripts listing all the segments from multi-segment shows had a negative impact. We saw broader, more generic and cliched responses. So I think we have speaking from personal experience, we've had a tendency to just upload the entire damn transcript to ChatGPT. And with a lot of these tools too, you have to understand that they have to read through all of that text. And a lot of times, especially on the older models, they're not reading through a lot of that text. They're pulling snippets from, maybe 30,000 words that are in a typical transcript. They're pulling maybe 5,000 of those words and coming up with a description. Like there are plenty of times where we've had multi-segment shows and we've gotten an episode description that only describes the first segment. And so that was sort of our first little like red flags of like, okay, this isn't something that we can rely on AI anymore. And I think that that's where a lot of us have kind of fallen into the trap of thinking that AI is going to solve everything, when maybe we need to think about where AI is actually really good. And maybe that, and not maybe, it changes over time. In a year from now, I could be saying that it's great at titles and descriptions. It's not there right now, to the point where we have changed our entire process to alleviate that and to focus on what's really important.
I want to add one more piece of value that came out of this particular research, is that they share their prompt design, which I got a lot of value out of it. We're sitting here saying, hey, AI is not going to be the master tool you think it would be to provide you with top-notch episode descriptions and titles. We're saying, hey, use that as a starter. It'll depend, the quality will depend on the input, obviously, and what you're asking it. But they share their prompt design of how they went about asking Microsoft Copilot to generate these episode titles. And I think this is kind of applicable just for a regular person that's trying to figure out, okay, how do I approach this episode I just recorded? How do I summarize it? How do I make a succinct episode title? And I think if you just follow kind of these steps that they share, once again, we'll have a link in the show notes, but they break it down to 3 different phases. One is understanding the episode. So what makes this episode stand out? Which audience segments would be interesting? List the keywords and target audience would use to search, which I mean is a good mindset to be in. Understanding your episode. What makes it stand out? Are there particular keywords that might, attract the listener or pop off on SEO or something like that? And then they've got phase 2 is brainstorming and iteration. So now they're asking, the Copilot to come up with some diverse titles and descriptions using keywords and style rules, and then iteratively refine, which is something you could do, right? Once you understand what your show is about, what's the standout things and the gems in it, now you start brainstorming and you're refining it and kind of boiling it down to a few options. And then the last phase they've got is refinement and selection. Select top 3 of reasons, and then it's obviously the output that they have an editor to look at. But I think those 3-step phases is a good, maybe a structure, basis, outline, whatever you want to call it, when it comes to generating and maybe writing out your own episode titles and descriptions. I thought that was very useful, actually.
It sounds like something, I think we might have mentioned this on a previous episode, but the RISE framework. So the RISE framework is so for your prompt, because you're right, and I'm saying this right now, like today, October 24th, because I think a lot of these, like ChatGPT and Claude, they recognize how important the prompt is. And so they're actively trying to make their software better so that the prompt doesn't have to be that intricate in order to get a quality response. And so the RISE framework is, for R, you are defining the role, the job you want the AI to act as. Example, act as a podcaster. So the I is instruction, the specific task you want the AI to do. So an example is write me a blog post about XYZ. S is the steps. And so the exact steps and detailed breakdown you want the AI to take as if you were hiring a contractor. And then the E or RISIN framework, not just the RISE framework, RISIN framework. So the E is the end goal. Tell the AI exactly what we expect to see from ChatGPT. So the example there is this blog article is aimed at intermediate yoga practitioners who want to be better at their form. And then the N, which I think is probably the most important, is the narrowing. And that's where you give restraints and narrow the results that the AI will produce. So this is an example of make the blog article between 500 and 1,000 words. Do not use overly flawed language. Make sure to use human sounding language. Make sure we omit the most commonly used adverbs like delve. So all of those within the Risen framework is very important for right now. I would argue, though, that if you are on the latest ChatGPT model, which is the O1 or the O1 mini, that you don't have to do this Risen framework anymore. Your prompt is less important because of how fast these tools are improving. I mean, we're only a year and a half into this thing. I'm already seeing the search results from ChatGPT of people coming to my podcast because they're asking it questions. And I think the overall takeaway that I really wanted to hammer home with this is that AI is supposed to be the thing that removes the monotonous task off our plate. So hand transcribing an audio file, you no longer have to do. So with that extra time, you really need to be focusing on the things that matter that AI can't do yet. And so by using these tools and adding it slowly into your day, I'm using it more than Google now. I don't typically do Google searches anymore unless I'm trying to find a specific address on a map in order to find locations to it or to see a menu from a restaurant. Everything else, all these other questions, I'm asking ChatGPT. I'm putting in, my financial spreadsheet, asking it, what am I missing? I'm putting it in, a landing page copy from my website. What am I missing? Where are the gaps? Help me understand what I could be covering in this article that isn't already there. It doesn't mean I'm going to use that input, but I am at least getting an assistant for $20 a month. And so I think that is sort of the reality that I think a lot of maybe podcasters or creators are just coming to the realization that yes, AI is incredibly powerful. It's incredibly promising, but there are still areas that it is incredibly weak in. And that is a chance for you as a creator to stand out from the rest of the people who are still just farming off the most important parts of the podcast to AI. And so that I think that's my little final takeaway. Still keep using the tools, experimenting with them. Keep the tab open on your browser. And so the next time you go to Google, maybe you go to ChatGPT instead and you start finding more and creative ways and different ways to use it that would help you in a variety of podcast ways, not just your episode titles and descriptions.
Said, get you a $20 a month assistant, but just know you're going to have to do some follow-up. You get what you paid for. But some very compelling arguments being made here. Blythe, I think we are probably good to call this episode a wrap and turn the tables on the listeners. I want to hear from you guys. If you currently use AI in your podcast process and you find it helpful, let us know. All right, whether that be using AI to come up with episode titles or descriptions like we've talked about. Let us know if maybe you pick up something from the article that we missed. We'd love to hear from you. As always, you could either leave us a comment in the YouTube section or send us fan mail if you're listening on the podcast version. There's a link in the show notes. And with that being said, we'll catch you guys around. Thanks for tuning in and listening. And until next time, peace.